Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Enterprise AI Show. I'm your host, Brian Gracely, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. Actually, this is Aaron's idea for something a little bit different. We've done, Sunday perspectives and weekend perspectives for a long time in the Cloudcast, and Aaron sort of came along and said, hey, I want to kind of blend together a couple of things that him and I both like. One of them is, for weekend shows and stuff. Sometimes it's good to just have something short, something to think about, maybe going into the next week. Kind of borrows a little bit from the dithering concept that John Gruber and Ben Thompson do, 15 minutes, one topic, just kind of focus on that stuff. And then, it gave us a chance to kind of blend together. Aaron tends to focus a lot more on the technical side of things. I tend to focus a little more on business and economic types of things. And so I don't know what the official name for this yet. We're still kind of spitballing some ideas. I kind of threw out models and markets as a, kind of a replacement for weekend perspective, but we'll see where this one goes. But yeah, this one will be about 15 minutes. Aaron and I going through, he grabbed one topic, sort of surprised me with it. And then we just kind of riffed on it in terms of both, technology as well as economics and just, looking at some trends that we've seen both, over the last year plus and where we think some of that might go going forward. So hope you all enjoy the new format, something we're going to try and do probably just on the weekends, and we'll do them a little more often if the feedback is good. So hope you enjoy it, and we'll get to it right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by ShareGate. You're out of time. Copilot needs to be deployed ASAP, but your tenant really isn't ready for it. Years of data, permissions, and users lurk in its shadows, ready to be exposed by AI. ShareGate Protect sees it all, so you can find the exposure risks, fix them fast, and deploy AI with confidence. Microsoft 365 Governance, they've got this. Learn more at sharegate.com/protect. Today's show is sponsored by Nasuni. There's a growing gap in AI right now between what's possible in theory and what successfully works at scale inside an enterprise. The difference comes down to unstructured file data. Many AI initiatives struggle because the file data they depend on is scattered, unstructured, and disconnected from where and how work actually happens. Nasuni changes that. It brings your unstructured file data into a single, secure foundation so AI, both generative and agentic, can access it with the context, governance, and performance it needs in production. Bring AI to where your unstructured data lives. See what it takes to activate your data for AI and request a demo at nasuni.com/AI. And we're back. And Aaron, it's good to be a guest on your show today. You are going to be the host and driving the topic and the conversation. I'm coming to these a little bit blind. You've got an idea. Let's run with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for everyone out there, getting back into the show, and after a bit of a break, had to go focus on the day job stuff for a little while, but getting back into it. And by the way, while I was out, I kind of did some thinking. I was like, all right, what's some things we can do to make the shows maybe a little bit different and also maybe a little bit more consumable as well. I know Brian and Brenda did some kind of dithering kind of episodes in the past, and it kind of got me thinking. It's like, okay, what's a way we can go attack a topic? And we're going to ask a question. And then we're going to split it into a couple different categories. We're going to say, like, why now? What's something in the past that we can compare this to? Because I feel like everything in this industry is cyclical at times. Yep. And then we're going to kind of do present state of everything. And we're going to talk a little bit about the future. And Brian's going to kind of tackle the business side of it. And I'm going to tackle the technical side of it. And we're going to see where this goes. This is an experiment. So everyone out there, just let us know what you think. So.
All right. What's the topic of the day?
So today, the first one is own your AI or rent your AI. And let me tell you why I came up with this one. There's an increasing number of companies who their marketing is simply that. And the why now is Fable 5 and GPT 5.6 getting restricted by the United States government. And for folks outside the United States, with me working for an international company, this is a really big deal of like, okay, if I'm somewhere not in the United States, or even if I am in the United States, I don't want the US government saying I can or can't have access to a model. Or what if I spend a whole bunch of money, trying to access this and all of a sudden it gets cut off, right? And so there's a lot of risks you have to mitigate in the enterprise. And this is something I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great topic, and I think the way I look at it is, for the first couple of years of generative AI, it was, there was a couple of interesting kind of motivations and constraints, right? So on one hand, if you were at a company and you started hearing about ChatGPT or whatever one that you were playing around with, it was like, I want to use that. I want to start experimenting with it, and I want it as fast as possible. So anybody who was offering something as essentially a SaaS service or out of the cloud, that was going to be your natural starting point. And then the other kind of big, boulder to push up the hill, if you will, is even if you were a company that was like, hey, I've got the concerns that Aaron just talked about, even if you were 2 or 3 years ago, maybe you were like, hey, I'm not really sure if I trust that when they say that if I put something in a VPC that my data is actually somehow not going into the model, or anything that had to do with your concerns about security or sovereignty or data, being able to get access to GPUs was really, really hard. I mean, still pretty hard, right? But I think, and so for those reasons, because so much stuff was new, I think companies just said, well, we don't want to get left behind. We need to start figuring this stuff out. And oh, by the way, the genie's out of the bottle. Shadow AI exists. People are just going to be doing stuff. And I think the things that you highlighted really are kind of, I hate to put numbers on stuff, but I feel like we're kind of in the beginning of sort of Gen AI 2, which is like, okay, now there are legitimate reasons why people are like, okay, it's not just, how fast can I do stuff? Or if we put out a plan that says we're going to do something, our stock price will go up. Now there's like legitimate concerns about, where's the data going? Are there laws that are going to impact this? Maybe we're an international company or something. But yeah, just the fact that like all the work that you might have done around a specific model might go away overnight, stroke of a pen, a war gets started, whatever. I think it's making people really kind of rethink, what should I be thinking about? Where are the more important things to be thinking about?
Yeah. So let's compare this to something in the past. And I came up with, and you tell me if you think this is valid or not, because like I said, I'm kind of popping all of these on you on the fly.
Yeah.
Private cloud versus public cloud. Like we had the days of on-prem and going way back, server huggers, right?
Yep.
Like versus public cloud and everything's an API, or gasp, the whole hybrid cloud. And honestly, that's kind of a shit show I'm just not even going to talk about. But, I feel like this kind of goes back to that. But at the same time, you can say it because, hey, it's on-prem and it's owning versus renting, if you will, in public cloud. But I think that's honestly where it stops. And the reason why I say where it stops is because public cloud turned into an extremely profitable business, and that's a whole other thing we're going to talk about in the futures. But there is so much to this to kind of unpack when it comes to that. But I just wanted to start as like the past analogy of something we've seen in the industry of own versus rent.
Yeah.
Is private versus public.
I mean, that's probably the best analogy to use, because it's relatively, within the memory of everybody who listens to this show, right? Like you were around 10 years ago, most likely. But yeah, I think it highlights a couple of different things. I mean, I think first and foremost, public cloud was, people have all sorts of reasons why it existed, but like the reason it kind of became popular was it was very easy, sort of startups aside, it was very easy to say, hey, I've had an experience where I went to my IT organization and they said no, right? Or they said, I can't get that done in a reasonable amount of time. And so it was faster, and it was yes to a lot of things. And so in that sense, there's parallels to the, hey, somebody else is doing something, I feel like I'm a little bit behind, I should go about doing that. I think where the comparison also holds up is, the early days of cloud, if you remember back to this, every single first, 6, 7, 8 AWS reinvents, one of the things that Andy Jassy always talked about was, he would roll out like S3 as for storage, and he would go, last year S3 cost this much, and this year it costs this much per gigabyte. And so it was this idea of like, the prices, this stuff's not expensive. Don't worry about the price. Don't worry about the price. And then at some point they stopped talking about the price. I feel like it was fairly close to like 2019 or right around COVID or something. And that's when everybody all of a sudden was like, hold on, this stuff is really expensive, right? They started, kind of rationalizing the cost of things. And I think we're seeing similar kinds of concerns that people have right now with public cloud AI services, right? I was at an event, I keynoted an event a couple of weeks ago, and one of the guys was literally like, yep, we're doing a bunch of stuff. We're pretty happy with where it is. We're expanding out the number of agents we have. And they're like, but we live in fear of the day when they stop subsidizing the service to us and they start, charging us the real price. So yeah, I think it's a reality. I think the pricing kind of crunch is coming much faster than cloud did, because cloud probably ran for 10 years before anybody really worried about the price of stuff. But yeah, there's definitely that. And then, I mean, the flip side of it is everybody you talk to that when you say like, hey, well, maybe you could run your own AI and you could, spin up your own GPUs, and they go, I don't have the skills for that. Like finding the skills, just like, finding the skills to do on demand, even, VMs as a service was a hard thing to find. And it wasn't like you could just go buy some software that automatically did that stuff. So yeah, I think there's great parallels between those, both at the technical and the business level.
Yeah. And the other one, kind of move into, present day of where we are. You've been doing a really good job articulating that. Is I'm also going to add another piece to that, which is the OSS models versus, the big cloud models, if you will. And what I see with all of this is, I mean, it does remind me even more of the private cloud versus public cloud debate of like, okay, hey, yes, I can build this myself, but there's the people that build their entire careers around OSS. Yeah. And build their entire careers around, how do you maintain these systems and how do you do care and feeding of all of these systems? And so the operations side of cloud, I think, like in the DevOps, I'm going to bring up DevOps for a second. In the DevOps mentality, I think there was a lot of ops that happened in all of this. And I think one thing we're really kind of missing in the AI world today is everyone just kind of threw up their hands like way faster than they did before and went, you know what, ops, no. I either want an OSS model that runs out of the box, or I want an API that I don't have to, really do ops around at all, full stop. And, the whole concept of AI ops just isn't necessarily something that's ever been a big thing. Maybe it's going to be. Maybe that's a future topic.
Well, I think part of that is it goes back to the fact of like, you could start doing DevOps because you never had any problem of being like, oh, I already have 50 servers to manage, or we already have 5,000 servers to manage. Now I could start rubbing some DevOps on it. Again, it goes back to, I think part of the reason why there is so little sort of private AI, if you will, private cloud AI, at least in comparison to the numbers we hear, is just, the one guy who sells GPUs that you would use sells them to 7 companies, right? And so this is where I kind of come back to, I think we may start to see that stuff start to emerge, later in the process than we did with private cloud. Because again, I think what's going to end up happening is, we're already starting to see whether it's Meta or whether it's, XAI or whatever are like, oh, I'm not going to be in the business of buying so much GPUs from those guys. Like I couldn't turn that into a business myself. So I'm going to sell it to this one company that does it. And I think, we're going to start to see the AMDs and the Intels and the, even NVIDIA start to say, okay, I don't want to necessarily be in a business where I only have 5 or 6 customers, of which 1 or 2 of them might completely drop out tomorrow. I better start figuring out ways to diversify what I do. And we'll see lesser chips that end up in the enterprise, but I think, it's a drum we've beaten for a long time on this, as long as we've been doing AI now. Is like, it is weird that, we've never seen a scale out trend, whether it was internet or whatever, that was only built on the most expensive chips. And I think we're due for that. Now it might be a year or 2 years from now, but yeah, I think we don't see it because people just can't get them, and you can't DevOps on your Mac being like, oh, there's a GPU in my Mac. That's not really, like you're not doing anything at scale.
Oh, I'll call it the consumer, prosumer, even hobbyist space. I mean, it kind of tops out at, I don't know, somewhere around 30 billion parameters these days on a, like a good Mac with a whole bunch of memory or something like that. And I mean, that's nowhere near a trillion, right? And so let's move into the future real quick, and then we'll close this out. So what happens, I'm going to kind of ask you this, of like, what's your crystal ball idea of what happens when the subsidies go away, and also too, what happens, if things get restricted in the future, if everything's kind of going up and to the right from a power standpoint? I mean, do we have to keep facing all of this?
Well, I think, there are certain constraints that are going to be very hard, right? This is where I go back to the idea of like, there's going to have to be a set of chips that don't require you to build a, world-class liquid cooled data center to be able to, do enterprisey sort of things. I feel like right now, there are, in the last year plus, whether it is, geopolitics, things having to do with wars and tariffs and, potentially, who knows what happens with NATO, that companies and countries are concerned about, like, how much control do I have? You've got all of the sort of uncertainty of the economics of whether it's an OpenAI or an Anthropic, whether it's upward economics, downward economics, like, are they going to survive? Are they going to go IPO and then have problems? Are they going to raise prices on me? I feel like there's this conglomeration of all these sort of concerns that are just keep coming back to this idea of, like, are we sure we have the right kind of control over our AI that we want, right? And again, it might move itself into, more sort of private cloud API or it might just be sort of a thing that comes along and is like, hey, the new hot startup is the company that can do, semantic routing between 4 or 5 different models based on cost or based on some other thing along those lines. But, I feel like right now there are more macro level problems or macro level concerns than we had over the last 3 or 4 years that are going to lead a lot of people to being like, I got to figure out what control of my journey looks like, because either I'm not going to be able to afford it, I'm not going to be able to access it, or some other thing that's going to be really disruptive to what they do. And I think we're going to get people that start, again, I got to kind of go into this, like, Gen AI 2.0. I think that's going to be somewhat top of mind as much more than we were the last couple of years of being like, hey, is this one better than the other one, and chasing, model metrics and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe we'll finally move past the, 95% of AI fails MIT stat at some point.
Yeah. The other thing about this that's sort of interesting, and we're kind of drawing comparisons, is, the last really big, some startup company subsidized their way into winning the market was sort of Uber versus Lyft. And, Lyft essentially, you don't hear about them anymore. They still exist, but Uber, did enough things. They went through enough trials and tribulations. They sort of, manipulated the market in ways that they did to where they're kind of the only thing. Now, the reality is, like, prices for both of them have both gone through the roof, but at least Uber has figured out a way through various kinds of diversification and changing their business model to be viable. But you don't hear anybody being excited about how cheap an Uber is. They're always like, yeah, it's just really expensive. And it is. I think people, like, that's going to be a parallel that people are going to look at between OpenAI and Anthropic, or Anthropic and whoever the number 2 competitor ends up being. Maybe it's Google or whatever. I think that in and of itself, of just seeing, like, you can't subsidize your way out of things forever, unless you happen to be backed by the federal government, like corn in Iowa or something. So, even if you love Anthropic, even if you love what OpenAI does, and you're not expecting their prices to go up 3x or 5x, I'm not being hyperbolic there. I think that's very realistic. You're operating with a blind spot, I think.
Yeah, agreed. So, I think that's a good place to wrap up.
All right, let's do that.
It's been so long, I honestly don't even remember how to close out the show, Brian. So
I think we just say,
you got to close out the show.
Yeah, I think we just say, hope you enjoyed the conversation, folks. Thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend, and we'll be back again next week.
Thanks for listening. Check us out at theenterpriseaishow.com for past shows, newsletters, and all things enterprise AI.